So, have you guys ever just had a drawing idea that sticks in your head? One that just won't go away and you really want a chance to draw it and it's been there forever but you just don't really get a chance because of other things going on? A long story short, that's what happened here, and I'm very glad that I got an opportunity to draw it. So as you can see, we're doing another designing video, and I, first off, have been very much so enjoying the designing videos. This has been just a lot of fun. But instead of doing some of my characters for Trace this time, I really wanted to do some Bungo Stray Dogs characters as mermaids, or mermen. And I definitely couldn't resist, especially because I realized that most people would expect maybe Dazai or Chuya or Atsushi or Akutagawa, one of the characters like that. But the idea kept sticking in my head. As you can see, if you've seen the show, the first character up that we're doing is Nikolai Gogol. And the idea of making the stabby clown man a clownfish merman was just too perfect. It was too perfect and it could not be resisted. On top of that, he's my fiance's favorite character. He is absolutely my fiance's favorite character. So I had to go with doing him first. And with the sketching process with this one, first off, I actually had a bit of a background to work on with this. I started out with a gradient, then I went in with like a blendy brush and I added some more color, added some actual brush strokes until I actually really liked the look of it. I made a bit of an ocean backdrop to put them against, and I'm really glad I did, because I think it turned out really nice, and it was really nice to draw on, and it made things less daunting to try and draw. But for the sketch, I started out with just a quick gesture. I wanted to try just really quickly getting a loose gesture of the kind of pose that I wanted, and the way I wanted his tail to be posed, and I started out with that first. But I really, really wanted to do this for a while for a few different reasons. One, Mermay. I couldn't not. I had to draw some kind of mermaid. Also, I like to do mermaid swimming. I've done it for a good years now. I have a monofin. I want a proper tail. It's a lot of fun. If you've never tried it and you like to swim, I really do recommend it. Just don't do it alone. It's not safe to do it alone. You want to do it with somebody else around. But I digress. But where it's Mermay, I wanted to draw some characters as mermaids. And my fiance and I, we have a bit of an AU for Bungo, where we do have a mermaid AU. So that's where this kept sticking in my head. And again, Nikolai as a clownfish merman was just too good of an opportunity to pass up. So I had to get a couple of references. Obviously for him, I pulled up a reference, like a bit of a character sheet, like from the show, and I did do some color picking when I got the colors. But for the clownfish, I really liked the idea of, I knew there were some clownfish that were black and white, so I pulled one up, especially since his character design is predominantly black and white. So the one I pulled up was a phantom clownfish, and I thought that would be perfect. And I know that sometimes the phantom clownfish as well can have little bits of orange, which I thought was perfect. So in the sketching, I did a loose gesture for the pose and the tail pose. And then when I was going in and refining, I had a lot of fun with the expression and figuring out how I wanted that. And I really just liked the idea of him talking to someone and just chatting like crazy because he is a goofball and a goober. And the posing, I really liked it. It seemed very playful, very him, and I really enjoyed it. But I wanted, in the design work, at least to an extent, I didn't want to just do your typical human upper body on fishtail lower body. I didn't want to do that. That wasn't very fun. And I wanted to step out of my comfort zone a little bit. So you'll see as I go to detail things, especially when I get to the line art, because there's certain things that I'm going to add in detail. There were certain details that I wanted to pull in somehow or another from his costume design, because I really like character costume design. I think it's very interesting, and I like the idea of leaning into that, where a lot of the coloring for his character was black and white, and that came from his costuming. So one of the things I did, his character design, if you can see in the reference that I have pulled up, I have I've really noticed the frilled collar, for one thing, of his costume. So I wanted to bring that into the design with his gills. Initially in the sketching, I was going to do the gills near his rib cage. I don't know why I went for that first, but I think I did it for a couple of the others first too before I went for the neck. But I really like the idea of giving him more standout, almost frilled gills. That was a little bit inspired by a frilled shark. If you've never heard of those, look it up. It's very interesting looking. It's a neat little shark. But I really liked that idea of doing more frilled gills to kind of allude to the frilled collar. But another thing I wanted to do was bring a couple of the diamond design details. And on his face, where he's usually got, the card covering one eye, I wanted to take the diamonds from that and I did them like little markings under his eye, the 3 little diamond shapes. And then on the collar of his cape, I wanted to do where it's got the diamonds, I brought those down along his shoulder blade and around his shoulder. And I wanted to do more allusions to his costume, but at first I wasn't sure how. But then I got the idea to bring he's got the frilled cuffs on his sleeves. So my next thought was just, well, why not have like an additional little fin on his arm that can fan out when he's swimming for a bit more propulsion. But when it's resting, it looks almost like a frilled sleeve cuff. And I kind of like that. It looks like a cuff for a sleeve. And that was something that was really nice to do. A lot of the design work that I did to bring in more of the character, though, wasn't until I got to the coloring phase. I did a little bit of allusions to it in the line art, but it didn't really come into play until I got to the coloring phase. When I got to the coloring phase, I wanted to do more than just have the transition from regular skin to tail. Like I said, I didn't want to just have normal human torso and then body. And then I got the idea, what if I brought the markings up further? Especially since I put some fins on his arms. And then that brought me to with the idea he's got the pom-pom on his chest in the character design. And I started out with that as a circle. I did go back off camera and actually make that a bit more of like an oblong marking that looks more like a marking and not just an orange dot on his chest. But I wanted to bring the actual markings and coloring further up the character, especially to more so allude to like the buttons on his vest and the actual colors where he's got the black and white, half and half alternating kind of thing. I wanted to allude to that a bit more. And also where he's wearing those gloves. And I think that the combination of that and the fact that he's got the orange around the ankle before his shoe, I was able to carry the orange over so the chest marking didn't look so out of place. So I took the gloves and I think I tried a few different things before I really figured out what I wanted to do. And the gloves, I just did some of the reddish orange on his hands and then some around the base of the tail where it fans out into fluke. So that became a thing where I was able to tie it in together more, and then I wasn't really able to find a way to justify the pom-pom on the tie of his braid. I kept trying to brainstorm and think about how I could add that in and how I could include that in a way to make it work. And I just couldn't. I tried and I couldn't. It just was not going to work. I didn't sketch it, but no matter how I thought about it, it just would not work. It wouldn't have been a way I could really justify it. So I just went with a little hair tie that was still that same color orange. And I had a lot of fun, honestly, with pulling this whole thing together. Especially the details with like the frilled gills and with the fin on the arms, and especially with the alternating colors on the pectoral fins and having those to where one was more black and one was more white. It was a lot of fun, and trying to figure out how I wanted the patterning to go for the black and white was a lot of fun, if a little bit difficult. But all in all, I'm really, really happy with the end result, and I think he turned out so well. And it was just so much fun to do. And it really got me in the groove so that I could do the other two. But anyway, I like how this turned out, and here's Nikolai. So getting into the next one, since I was doing Nikolai, I really also wanted to do Fyodor Dostoevsky. I ended up doing just characters that are associated with bad guys, and I say that because the last one, not to give spoilers, cover your ears for like 3 seconds, but I say associated with bad guys because the other one I did was Sigma, and if you're up to date, you know why I say that. Anyway, for Fyodor, it was a little bit harder to pick a fish. But given the newest revelations in especially the manga, I didn't want to go with just any fish. And here's why. I want to stay away from spoilers just in case anybody's not up to date on the manga. But I had to go with, because we figured out this isn't too much of a spoiler, but now we know at least an extent of how his ability works. So, I wanted to go with something a bit more interesting for him. And given what we have learned in the manga, I wanted to go with a bit more of an ancient fish. So the one that came to mind, and it was really hard to find a good reference that wasn't like tilted at a funny angle where I could just get a good look at the fish. The one that ultimately came to mind was a coelacanth. And if you don't know what these are, they're to an extent considered living fossils because they have not evolved very much at all in the last like 35 million years or longer. I think actually longer. But they're very interesting fish. They're very ancient. They're very ancient looking. They do have that look about them like old fish do. And fun fact, they don't have a proper spine, actually. They have like a tube-like structure that mimics the function of a spine, but it's not an actual spine like you find in other fish. And it's very fascinating, but because of the kind of character that he is, I thought a coelacanth would be perfect. Especially because I really liked the distinctive, almost diamond-like shapes that some of the fins on a coelacanth have. So I really liked that idea, and again, I went with the neck gills whenever I was drawing him. The posing that I did for Fyodor was a lot more inspired by a particular panel in the manga. If you're up to date on Bungo, I think with the design you can at least figure out the panel that the posing was inspired by, but I didn't want to do the same expression. That's why it's not the same expression. But I really did enjoy drawing him. I really like his character. He's a very interesting villain. I think he's a very just fascinating character, and the fact that we don't know, there's still so much that we don't know about him. That was another reason why I found coelacanth to be very interesting to use for him, for his tail, because there's still a lot that we don't know about the coelacanth. And just something about that shrouded in mystery and ancient fish, I thought that was very fascinating, very interesting. Especially because I found a patterned one that was very, very interesting, and I thought it would be just perfect. I wish, in retrospect, I do wish I had pulled a bit more like gold coloring or some actual gold coloring into the character's design for like the fishtail and stuff, because on his costuming he has a bit of it. But I didn't go as much for costuming for inspiration for the way everything looks this time, because with a coelacanth I couldn't as much find a way to justify that. So I played into the fish design itself, and again I wanted to, whenever I got to the coloring phase, I really wanted to bring the design and the scales and markings up onto the character's body a bit more, because I just find that a bit more interesting. If I'm not mistaken, I actually did a couple of the lighter colored markings on his face as well, but I really enjoyed being able to create these in the way that I did. And as a character and design-wise, I really, really liked the idea of having him that way and that design. And again, I did fins on the arms just because I think that's something that I like to do, and I believe I did his ears a slightly different way from the way I did Nikolai's, but I wanted them to look different and very different in the way that everything manifested on them, because I love the idea of variety and not just same concept, different tail. But I liked the idea still of bringing up the markings all the way up the body, at least to an extent, and then having the gills and the additional fins and I wanted to do the rear fin as well, and I ultimately really liked the way it turned out. I think the coloring gave me a little bit more trouble on that one because I was trying to figure out exactly how I was wanting to do it. There was a lot of sitting and planning as I was doing the character and the coloring and getting everything lined up, and I really did enjoy doing this. And I might have to do some turning different fish into like mermaid characters at one point, especially with summer coming up. Actually, with these designs, with how much fun I'm having with them, I might actually turn them into merch. Just because I kind of love them, and I might have to do more of the characters. Especially if you can think of any specific fish that would be really good for different characters, if you watch the series, if you think of any fish in particular that would be really good for different characters in the series, let me know. I think the one exception would be Dazai, because of running jokes in the series, especially the Japanese version in the sub, it would have to be a mackerel. It would have to be a mackerel. I'd have to find a way to do that. But if you can think of any inspiration and anything that would be interesting, definitely let me know, because I would definitely appreciate it. But all in all, here is Fyodor, and I really like how he turned out. I think he looks interesting, especially with the coelacanth's tail. So now that brings us to our last one, and this is Sigma. I really like his character design overall and in general, and I have to get this out of the way talking about his character design as I'm sketching. First off, side note, I had a lot of trouble figuring out how I was going to pose him and him still be, like, visible, and then where I had the thought where I might want to turn them into merch, I didn't want to have to draw him completely overlapped where I had to erase some of the line art and stuff, so I had to adjust folders and everything so they could be completely on his own in his own folder, just so that I could do this a lot easier. But a side note on his general character design before I get into the inspiration, not that you can't already see it. There is something about his design. He reminds me so much of a Yu-Gi-Oh character. Just the way he looks and the way his design is done, it just makes me think so much of Yu-Gi-Oh! And that's not a bad thing. I actually kind of love his character design for it. But as a character, I really like him. He's a very interesting character, especially with his background. And I think he's a very pretty character too. And because he's a very pretty character, I wanted to give him a very pretty fish. So I went with a beta. I know some people pronounce it beta, some people pronounce it beta. I've heard it both ways. I'm more comfortable saying beta, and I will probably just call it that, because if I try and call it a beta, I'm gonna mess up and say it beta constantly anyway. However, there was another reason that I really liked a beta for him. Given his situation, at least initially, with the introduction and everything, there's a bit of an element of him being kind of trapped in the situation he's in, really. And I found that very interesting, especially when you think of, like, a beta fish, because people are always putting them in tanks that are far too small for beta fish. People are putting them in these itty-bitty, teeny-tiny tanks where they can't really be happy, and keeping them trapped there when they should be in a bigger tank. And there was just something about that, along with the fact that he's pretty and a beta fish is pretty, that was just, it made for the perfect kind of thing. And those big pretty fins were just too perfect not to do. And I had a lot of fun with the actual design work. His was a bit more simple in the way that I did the actual design work. What really make it are the fins. But one thing I did, especially because in comparison to the other two fish, betas tend to have a bit stockier of a body because they're mostly fin. They're mostly fin with the way that I've noticed. So with his tail, I gave him a more stocky, stout fish tail, and then the rest of his mass is made up with fin, and it makes him look a lot bigger than he is, just because there's so much flowy, pretty fins. And I thought that was a really neat little design detail to work into there. Now, admittedly, getting his hair figured out in both the sketching and the inking process gave me a lot of trouble. I struggled a lot with that. There was a good bit of trying to just figure it out and just sitting there and staring between the actual sketch and my reference. to figure out, okay, how do I break down how his hair is gonna look in here? But I do like how it turned out in the end. And I definitely did his ears a lot more akin to looking like the way the fins do. I thought that was neat. It looked really cool, and it tied the design together a bit more, but I really enjoyed figuring out how I wanted those big pretty fins to look. And the way I finally figured it out and put it together was, for one thing, drawing more loosely. That's both in the sketch and when I did the line art. I tried to loosen up my actual drawing, but another thing that I wanted to do was, what really helped me break through was thinking of the fins and the way that they fell and flowed, was thinking of them a bit more like how I would imagine fabric to fall and flow, and that really helped in the long run. Especially, it really helped to figure out how I wanted it to flow in the water, especially in combination with his hair. I tried with all three of them to make it look like their hair's kind of floating in the water. I think I was most successful with Sigma, although I think I did okay with Fyodor on that respect. I could have done a little bit better with Nikolai's, but I ultimately like how all of them look. But with Sigma, it was a lot more interesting once I got to the coloring phase, because it was a matter of figuring out exactly how much I wanted to bring the markings up, especially because there wasn't as much of a variety in the colors of the markings as there was in the other two, at least in regard to speckling or like different areas of different color. So I had to really work with that, and unlike the other two, because at least with Fyodor, I did try and pull the darker colors from at least starting out somewhere along his outfit, and I think I went with a little bit more of a purpley gray, and then I changed to a little bit more of a bluer gray just to fit a little bit better. And I added some red in there, especially because of his red eyes. But with Sigma, I really liked the color and the way the purple looked on the actual reference picture that I used for the beta fish. So I leaned into that a bit more, and I gave him more of a purple tail, and I really like how that turned out, and the end result was something that I really ended up liking, especially with the different shades of purple along the fins and along the shadows, and then the highlights with the more bluish color. I actually ended up really liking how that turned out and how everything turned out with the lighting. The contrast was something that I really liked, and I think even with other colors not being as prominent as the ones in the tail, carrying up into light colors from his character design or anything like that, I think it works. At least as far as I'm concerned, it does. I think it works pretty well. But overall, I really like the end result, and I went again with the gills on the neck. I think I had to double back and add them in the line art phase, but I also did, again, bring up the colors and the markings onto the upper body as well, and onto the arms. And, of course, the arm fins again. I really love how all of it turned out, and the end result of all three is one that I'm honestly extremely, extremely happy with. They were a lot of fun to do, and they were a lot of fun to brainstorm and to figure out and to troubleshoot, which is another reason why I feel like I want to try and do more of these. Because for one thing, they're fun, and for another thing, I really like Mermaids, and I love Bungo. Of course, I may also have to do some Jujutsu Kaisen ones, because I think that could be fun, because we've been really into that lately. But I really do want to do some more with the Bungo Mermaid stuff. I think that would be a lot of fun to do and really interesting. And I think that Sigma turned out very pretty. The design of the fish fins, I ended up really, really satisfied and happy with how those turned out. So here we have all three of them. So I really, really like them. I really like how they turned out, and this was just so much fun. Quick question, would you guys like to see the Trace characters as mermaids and mermen? Because I might have to do that, because this has been a lot of fun, and a really interesting thought experiment too. But again, if you have any suggestions with other Bungo Stray Dogs characters, with what fish that their mermaid form should be based on, definitely leave suggestions. I would love to hear about it, because because it might end up with another one of these, especially because I really love Mermay and I love Mermaids, so this was just the perfect thing to do, and getting to draw that this past week is a little bit of a birthday treat for myself, and it was a lot of fun to do, but I really hope you guys liked it, and if you did, or if you have any suggestions of how I could do better with the mermaid thing in future, let me know down below. But thank you guys so much for watching. A huge thanks to my patrons, Inside Chaos, Salmon, and Creativa Artly. I appreciate all of you guys so much, and I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I will see you guys next time. Bye!